The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that split the afternoon silence. $7, just like that 80 acres of Montana belonged to a girl with $12 left in her pocket, no family she could name out loud, and a face the locals had already decided not to remember. 18 years old, standing in a courthouse that smelled like dust and old varnish, holding a receipt that felt heavier than a tombstone. Outside, the wind moved across the prairie the way it had moved for 10,000 years before anyone bothered to call this place a town. It didn't care who held the deed. It only cared that something was about to begin. Her name was Sage Whitmore, and for the first 16 years of her life, she didn't know that name meant anything at all. To understand how a girl with nothing ends up owning land for the price of a diner breakfast, you have to go back. You have to go back to a gray cafeteria in Nebraska, to a window that looked out on a parking lot where social workers came and went, taking some children and leaving others. You have to go back to a morning in March when the oatmeal was thin and the powdered milk was thinner, and a woman with tired eyes called a girl into her office to give her a small cardboard box and a fold of cash and a kind of goodbye that wasn't really kind at all. That was the beginning. That was always the beginning. Sage was 16 the day they let her go. In the foster system, 16 is a cliff. Too old to be adopted, too young to matter. The state would keep a file on her for 2 more years, but the chances of someone showing up to take her home had dropped to almost nothing the day she turned 13. By 16, the staff didn't even bother pretending anymore. They just counted down the months until her file could be closed and her bed could be filled by some smaller child with bigger eyes and better odds. Mrs. Whitaker found her after breakfast. She was a tired woman with tired eyes, and she had been running St. Augustine's for 22 years. She wasn't unkind. Sage understood that even then, Mrs. Whitaker was simply worn down by too many children and not enough miracles. She had handed out too many cardboard boxes in her life to put much ceremony into another one. The office smelled like old coffee and printer ink. The manila envelope held $175. State allowance, enough for maybe 2 weeks if a person was careful and slept somewhere that didn't charge money for the privilege. The cardboard box was small enough to hold in one hand. 12 years in foster care, 12 years of files and forms, and caseworkers writing notes in the margins of her life. And this was what remained of the woman who had given birth to her. One small box, light as a sparrow. "These are your mother's effects," Mrs. Whitaker said. "We've held them in storage since you arrived. You're old enough now to have them." Sage stared at the box. She didn't open it. Not there. Not in front of Mrs. Whitaker, with the fluorescent light buzzing overhead and the smell of bleach drifting in from the hallway. Some things you don't open in front of strangers. Some things you carry out into the world first and find a quiet corner and unwrap with hands that won't stop shaking. She asked about her father. Mrs. Whitaker shook her head. She asked about her mother. "Car accident," Mrs. Whitaker said. "You were 4. There's nothing else in the file. Then the envelope, then the money, then the small, dry handshake at the door of an office where 1,000 other goodbyes had been handed out the same way. Good luck, Sage. That was it. 16 years in the system done. She opened the box that night in a bus station in Lincoln. The fluorescence flickered. A janitor pushed a wet mop in slow circles across the linoleum. Somewhere a vending machine hummed like a sleeping animal. Sage sat on a bench with the box on her knees and the wind pressing cold against the glass behind her, and she lifted the lid the way a man might lift the lid of a coffin he was not sure he wanted to look inside. 3 things. A silver ring tarnished almost black with 2 initials etched on the inside of the band. M.W. A folded piece of paper. Her own birth certificate. Mother Marlene Whitmore. Father unknown. Place of birth. Billings, Montana. And a photograph. It was a Polaroid. Faded at the edges, soft as old cloth. A young woman stood in front of a white farmhouse, one hand raised to shade her eyes from the sun. She was 17 at most. She was smiling in a way that looked half like joy and half like a dare, as if she were challenging the camera to capture something she wasn't ready to give away. Behind her, the farmhouse rose against a blue sky so wide it seemed to bend the corners of the photo. A wraparound porch, a barn off in the distance, fields stretching to a horizon that seemed to go on forever, the way only Montana horizons can. On the back, in careful cursive, someone had written Mama's Place, Cedar Bluff, Montana. Sage turned the photograph over and looked at the woman again, at her mother. She had her mother's eyes, she realized, that same dark brown, almost black under certain light. She had her mother's chin too, that same stubborn jut Mrs. Whitaker used to call her difficult face. But she didn't have her mother's smile. She didn't have whatever it was that let a person stand out in the open sun and look at the world like it might owe her something good. Sage had nothing, except now she had a place, a name, Cedar Bluff, Montana, and that was enough to start walking. The 2 years that followed are hard to talk about, not because they were the worst years a person can have. Sage had heard worse. She'd known kids who walked out of foster care and into prison cells before the year was out, kids who turned up dead in the police blotter before their 20th birthday. She was lucky compared to many, but luck isn't the same as easy, and those 2 years taught her things a girl shouldn't have to learn. She washed dishes in a diner outside Cheyenne until the owner's son caught her alone in the storage room one Tuesday night. She left through the back door without her last paycheck. She didn't argue. She didn't report it. She just walked. She picked apples in an orchard near Bozeman until the season ended and the foreman shrugged and said there was no more work and no more place for her in the bunkhouse. She picked her backpack up off the bunk and walked. She cleaned motel rooms in a town so small it didn't even have a name on the highway sign. She slept in bus stations when she could afford the ticket somewhere else. She slept in shelters when they had room. One November, near a laundromat in a town she has since refused to remember, she slept curled against the warm vent of the dryer exhaust, and she woke at dawn with frost in her hair and her fingers so stiff she had to breathe on them before she could open her own backpack. She kept moving. She kept looking. Every library she passed, she stopped. Every public computer with internet access, she searched. Cedar Bluff, Montana, Whitmore family. Every combination she could think of, every variation, every spelling. For 18 months, she found nothing. And then in the public library in Billings, she found everything. The county records were buried in a database almost no one ever opened. Property files, tax documents, the bones of a place. Sage sat in a wooden chair under a fluorescent light, her boots wet from the slush outside, her hands trembling above the keyboard, and she found what she had been looking for since she was 16 years old. Cedar Bluff had been a real town once. 300 people at its height in the 1940s, a feed store, a church, a one-room school, a scatter of farms along a river that dried up every summer and came back swollen every spring. Now, the population was listed at 800 and falling. The school had closed in the late 90s. The church held services once a month when a circuit preacher made his rounds, but the property records still existed. And in those records, Sage found her. Adelaide Whitmore, 80 acres, Section 12, Township 4 North, primary residence 1 farmhouse, 1 barn, various outbuildings, property acquired 1952. Adelaide Whitmore had been her great-grandmother. Sage sat there a long time staring at the screen, and she didn't move. Outside the library window, the snow was starting to fall again. A child laughed somewhere in the children's section. A man coughed in the row behind her. None of it reached her. Adelaide Whitmore had owned that farm for 60 years. Adelaide Whitmore had died 2 years ago. And the county records at the bottom of the page in a single dry line of administrative text, said the property had been listed as abandoned. Back taxes owed $6,200. Final notice issued. Property scheduled for county auction. Date, March 15th. Minimum bid $5. Sage looked at the calendar pinned beside the librarian's desk. It was the 12th of March. She had 3 days. She hitched a ride with a farmer hauling feed sacks to a ranch outside Cedar Bluff. He was a quiet man named Earl with hands the color and texture of saddle leather, and he didn't ask questions which Sage appreciated more than she could say. He led her out at the intersection of 2 dirt roads and pointed west. "Town's that way," he said. "What's left of it?" She started walking. Cedar Bluff looked like a place that was slowly forgetting itself. The main street had 6 buildings on it, and 3 of them were boarded up. A feed store anchored one end, its painted sign faded to the soft pink of an old bruise, but still legible. A diner sat at the other end, smoke rising from a chimney in a thin gray ribbon. In between a hardware store, a church, and 2 empty storefronts faced each other across cracked pavement, like old men who had stopped speaking years ago and could no longer remember why. The county clerk's office shared a building with the post office and a single-room library. The woman behind the counter looked up over her reading glasses. Her nameplate said Doris Kemper. She had the kind of face that had spent 30 years saying no to people and the cheekbones to back it up. "Auction's tomorrow at 10, Doris said when Sage asked. "Courthouse. You planning to bid?" "Maybe." Doris looked her over. 18 years old, dirty backpack, a jacket that had been washed too many times in laundromat machines that hadn't loved it back, boots that had walked too many roads. Doris's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Not pity exactly, something older than pity, something closer to recognition. "That Whitmore place has been empty 2 years, Doris said. "Old woman died alone out there. Nobody's touched the house since. Roof's half gone. Pipes burst the first winter. I know. You'll need more than $5 to make it livable. I know that too." Doris shrugged. "Your funeral." She didn't know how close to right she was. The auction took place in a room that smelled like dust and old wood and the particular dryness of papers that have sat in metal filing cabinets for too long. 6 people sat in folding chairs. All of them were old enough to be Sage's grandparents. A man in a rumpled suit stood at the front and read from a clipboard in a voice flat as a frozen pond. 4 properties on the list. The first 3 sold fast. An empty lot, a burned-out filling station, 30 acres of scrub nobody wanted. The men in the folding chairs bid the way men bid for expired groceries, out of habit, without enthusiasm, without joy. Then the clerk got to the last item. Whitmore property, 80 acres, section 12, farmhouse barn outbuildings, condition as is, minimum bid $5. He looked up. Nobody moved. The clock on the wall ticked. A fly hit the window pane and slid down it slowly. Somebody coughed. $5, the clerk said again. "Anyone?" Sage raised her hand. $7. A few heads turned. She saw the small smiles, the amusement, the pity reserved for children who don't know any better. A girl bidding on a corpse of a house. A girl spending $2 she didn't have to win a fight that everyone in that room had already decided wasn't worth winning. The clerk repeated it without inflection. $7, going once, a pause, going twice, another pause. He sounded almost surprised. The gavel came down. Sold. Sage walked to the front of the room and signed her name on a piece of paper. Her hand was shaking, but her signature came out clear. Sage Whitmore. The clerk handed her a receipt and a ring of rusted keys that looked like they might crumble between her fingers, and he spoke to her the way a man speaks to someone he is fairly sure he will never see again. "Congratulations. You have 90 days to pay $1,500 in back taxes After that, the county takes it back. 90 days, $1,500. She had $40 left in her pocket, no job, no skills anyone wanted, and no one in the world who would know or care whether she lived through the winter. But she had something else now, something she had never had before in her life. She had land, she had a name, she had a place where someone who shared her blood had once stood in the sun and smiled at a camera. For the first time in 18 years, she belonged somewhere. The walk to the farm took 2 hours. The road turned from pavement to gravel to dirt, winding through fields gone wild with 2 years of neglect. Brown grass moved in the wind like an ocean. The sky overhead was so wide it bent the edges of her vision. Sage had grown up in cities, in institutions, in places where the horizon was always blocked by buildings and fences and parking lots. Here, there was nothing between her and the curve of the earth itself. It should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt terrifying, because the closer she got to the farm, the more she understood what she had bought. The house appeared first rising from the prairie, the way an old animal rises from sleep, slowly, painfully, with a kind of patient grief in every line. White paint peeled from the clapboards in long curling strips. The wrap-around porch sagged on the left side where a support post had given way years ago. 3 of the upstairs windows were dark holes where glass should have been. The roof in one corner had simply collapsed, leaving a wound that opened the attic to the open sky. Behind the house, the barn leaned at an angle that defied physics, like someone had propped it against the wind one afternoon and walked off, and the wind had been holding it up ever since. And everywhere, the grass had taken back what people had once built, chest high in places, swallowing what might have been a path, burying what might have been a garden, covering the bones of a life. Sage stood at the edge of the property for a long time. The wind pushed against her back like a hand that couldn't decide whether to guide her forward or push her away. She thought about turning around. She could sell the keys to someone in town, walk back to the diner, catch a ride to anywhere, find another orchard, another diner, another laundromat vent, another bus station bench. She'd done it before. Her body knew the rhythm of it, the way a soldier's body knows the rhythm of a march. But that life had taught her one thing above all others. It led nowhere. It led nowhere. She took a breath and she walked toward the house. The front door was not locked. The frame had warped so badly that the door sat at an angle, leaving a gap wide enough for animals to come and go as they pleased. And they had. The smell hit her the moment she stepped onto the porch. Mouse droppings, mildew, the sweet sour stench of a house that had been left to die. She pushed the door open. The living room might have been beautiful once, high ceilings, a stone fireplace, windows on 3 sides that would have let in light all day. Now plaster hung from the ceiling in long, damp sheets. The floor was soft underfoot, treacherous with water damage. Something had nested in the corner. She moved slowly, testing each step, the kitchen counters crumbling, the sink hanging loose from the wall, a bedroom, a mattress reduced to springs and mold, a bathroom she would not describe to anyone ever. But the bones were good. She could see that under the damage. Strong walls, heavy beams, a foundation that had held for 70 years and would hold for 70 more if someone gave it a reason to. "The bones are good," she said aloud, just to hear something besides the wind. Her voice sounded small, hopeful, foolish. She kept walking. In what had once been a back room, she found the first true sign that someone had lived in this house, not just existed in it, lived in it. A bookshelf still standing with books still on it, a rocking chair by the window, its cushion gnawed, but its frame whole, a basket of yarn, the colors faded but still recognizable, and on the wall, framed photographs. She approached them carefully, afraid they might crumble at her touch. A man in overalls, standing beside a tractor, a woman in a flower dress, holding a baby, 2 children running toward the camera, mouths open in laughter, and at the center of the wall in a silver frame, one photograph, a young woman standing in front of this house, one hand raised to shade her eyes from the sun. Sage reached out and she touched the glass. It was cool under her fingers, real. Her mother had stood in this room. Her mother had hung this photograph. Her mother had been here. Sage sank slowly down onto the warped floorboards, and for the first time since she was 4 years old, she cried as if she had finally been given permission. That night she slept in the truck. It was an old Chevrolet pickup, rusted to the color of dried blood, parked in what had once been a detached garage behind the house. The keys were still in the ignition. When she turned them, the engine coughed twice and died, but the cab was dry. The seats were cracked, but not moldy, and when she curled up with her jacket as a blanket and her backpack as a pillow, it felt more like safety than anything she had known in years. The cold woke her before dawn. March in Montana is not kind to people sleeping in dead trucks. Her breath came out in white clouds. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy. When she finally got the door open and stepped down into the frost, the grass crunched under her boots like broken glass. But the sky, she had never in her life seen a sky like that. Pink and orange and gold spreading from the horizon like a fire that had been waiting all night to start. The fields stretched out around her silver with frost, and for one long moment she forgot the cold and the damage and the $1,500 she did not have and the 90 days she could not waste. She just stood there, and she watched the sun come up on her land. Her land. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she was only beginning to learn. But she said them out loud there in the frozen grass, with her breath rising like smoke into the new light. My land. She went back to the house as soon as there was enough light to see by. She needed to understand what she was dealing with, how bad the damage really was, what could be saved and what couldn't, and she needed to find the hatch. The night before, huddled in the dead truck, she had read through the papers from her mother's box one more time. Among them was a folded letter, so old the creases had almost worn through, written in a careful cursive that did not match her mother's handwriting. My dearest Marlene, I don't know if you will ever come back. I pray every day that you will. But if you don't, I want you to know that I forgive you. Whatever happened that night, whatever made you run, it doesn't matter. You are my granddaughter. You are my blood, and I love you. If you ever do come home, look under the barn, your great-grandfather's hiding place. He built it during the Second World War when he thought the world might end. I have kept it up. Everything you need to start over is there. Come home, Marlene. Please come home. All my love, Grandma Adelaide. The letter wasn't dated, but it had been in her mother's belongings when she died, which meant her mother had kept it carried, it never thrown it away. Maybe she had meant to come back. Maybe she had tried. Maybe she had spent her whole short life planning a return she never found the courage to make. Sage would never know, but she could find the hiding place. The barn was worse than the house. The main structure leaned so far to the east that she was afraid to breathe near it. Half the roof had fallen in, creating a mountain of debris that blocked most of the interior. The smell of rotted hay and old animal waste made her eyes water, but the floor was still there. Wooden planks warped and filthy but solid when she tested them with her weight. She started in the corner furthest from the collapsed section, feeling along the edges of each plank, looking for a seam, a hinge, anything that suggested a door. It took her 2 hours. The hatch was in the second stall, hidden under a layer of dirt and old hay so thick it looked like part of the floor. She found it by accident when her boot caught on a metal ring she had taken for a broken piece of equipment. She pulled. The door was heavy. Her arms burned, but slowly, inch by inch, it came up. Beneath it, wooden stairs descended into darkness. She used her phone for light. The battery was almost dead and she didn't care. She had to see. The room below was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were lined with the careful inventory of a woman who had prepared year after year for a homecoming that never came. Cans of food, some of it probably still good, tools wrapped in oiled cloth, seeds in sealed jars, a lantern, matches, a first aid kit, and on a small table against the far wall, a metal box. Sage opened it with hands that would not stop shaking. Inside, she found $1,100 in cash, mostly 20s and 10s, bundled with rubber bands that crumbled at her touch. She found a leather journal, 30 years thick, its pages yellow with age and good ink. She found letters, 47 letters, each one in its own envelope, each one addressed in the same careful cursive to Marlene Whitmore, and each one stamped at some post office in some other state and returned to sender. And beneath the letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, 13 birthday cards, one for every year from the year Sage turned 5 to the year she turned 17. She opened the first card with hands that no longer felt like her own. Pink paper, hand-drawn flowers around the edges. Inside, in that same cursive, "Happy 5th birthday, my dearest Sage. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you will ever read this, but I made you a card anyway because somewhere in the world you are turning 5 today, and I want you to know that someone is thinking of you. Your great-grandmother Adelaide." Sage opened the next, and the next, and the next. Year after year of birthday wishes for a child she had never met, each one addressed to Sage because somehow Adelaide had found out the name, each one filled with small updates about the farm and the weather and the cat she had taken in and named Hope. The last card was dated only 3 months before Adelaide died. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. "Happy 17th birthday, Sage. Next year, you'll be a woman, old enough to find your way home. I have left everything for you. The money, the letters, the land, it is all waiting. Please come home. I don't have much time left, but I will hold on as long as I can. I love you. I have always loved you. Grandma Adelaide." She died 11 days after writing those words. She had held on as long as she could, but she had not lived to see Sage walk through her door. Sage pressed the last card against her chest, and she stayed in that small room beneath the barn until she could no longer feel the cold or the dark or the weight of 2 years of running. Down there, surrounded by the careful inventory of a love that had waited 30 years to be claimed, she made a decision, the kind a man makes when his back is to the wall and he has finally stopped running. She was going to stay. She walked back into town the next morning with one of the bundles of cash in her pocket. She paid $600 on the back taxes, the first installment, and Doris Kemper stared at her like she had grown a second head. "You're actually staying?" It wasn't a question. "I'm staying. Winter comes early here. Some years October. Gets down to 20 below. I know. There's no heat in that house. No working water. I know that too." Doris shook her head slow, but she took the cash. She stamped the receipt, and for 1/2 second, Sage thought she saw something pass behind the older woman's eyes that might have been respect. Maybe. The feed store at the end of Main Street was run by a woman named Opal Hendricks. She was 71 years old with white hair cropped close to her skull and hands like the bark of an old cottonwood. She had owned the store for 40 years, ever since her husband died young and left her with 3 children and a mortgage and a stubborn streak nobody in the county had been able to wear down since. She wore men's work shirts. She drank her coffee black. She did not waste words. Sage went into the store on a Tuesday afternoon, and she walked the aisles slowly, the way a person walks who is counting what they cannot afford. Tarps, nails, rope, the simple tools of survival. She did this for 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, Opal spoke. "You're the girl who bought the Whitmore place." "Yes, ma'am." "You knew Adelaide?" "She was my great-grandmother." Opal studied her then, a long, steady look from pale blue eyes that had spent 7 decades reading weather and livestock and the faces of strangers. Her expression did not change. "You've got her chin," she said finally. "That stubborn set used to drive her husband half crazy." Sage did not know what to say. "Adelaide and I were friends 60 years, Opal said. "Came in here every Thursday from the early 60s till the year her hip went bad. Used to bring me biscuits in a tin." She paused. "She talked about your mother all the time. Marlene, the granddaughter who left, never stopped believing she would come back." "My mother died when I was 4, Sage said quietly. "She never came back because she couldn't." Something moved across Opal's face. Not pity, something harder and softer at the same time. "Adelaide never knew," she said. "She would have found you if she'd known. She would have moved every stone between here and the ocean." "I know. I read the letters." Opal was silent a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a scrap of paper covered in handwritten numbers. "I've got damaged inventory in the back," she said. "Tarps with small tears, nails that got wet and rusted before I could sell them. Not worth putting on the shelf. Still usable if a person doesn't mind imperfections. I can't pay much." "I wasn't asking about money," Opal said. Her voice had gone gruff in the way certain people's voices do when they are trying not to feel anything. "I was asking if you could use it." Sage felt something loosen in her chest. The first true kindness offered to her since she was old enough to remember being offered any. "Yes," she said, "I could use it." That was how she met Silas Kettering. He worked for Opal, part-time, she said, though he seemed to be at the store every day Sage went in. He was 23, tall and lean with hair the color of strong tea and eyes the gray of wood smoke. His family had farmed a small patch of land north of Cedar Bluff for 4 generations since his great-grandfather came over from the old country with nothing but a pair of boots and a wife. His father had died when Silas was a boy, and his Aunt Opal had stepped in for those years until his mother could stand on her feet again. The first time Sage saw him, he was unloading feed sacks from a delivery truck. He looked at her once, nodded, went back to his work. The second time, she was struggling to load damaged tarps into the bed of Adelaide's old truck. She had gotten the engine running by then, mostly through stubbornness and an internet video about carburetors watched on the library computer, but her arms weren't strong enough to lift the heavy rolls of plastic on her own. Silas appeared beside her without a word. He grabbed one end of the tarp, waited for her to grab the other. Together, they slid it into the truck bed. "Thanks," Sage said. He nodded. That was the entire conversation. But over the weeks that followed, he began showing up at the farm. Not to talk, just to work. He'd arrive in the morning, spend a few hours helping her patch a wall or reinforce a doorway and leave before dark. When she asked him why, he shrugged. "Opal sent me." She found out later that Opal had only asked him to check on her once. After that, he came back on his own. "Your great-grandmother helped my mother," he said finally, after about the 10th time she asked. "Adelaide was a midwife, best one in 50 miles. Delivered me, in fact. My mother was in labor for 36 hours during a blizzard in 2001. The roads to the hospital were closed. Adelaide came on foot through the snow, carried her bag the whole way. Saved my mother, saved me." He looked at the house, at the work still to do. "Debts don't go away just because the people die," he said. The third person who pulled Sage back from the edge that spring was Verna Caldwell. She was 52 years old, a widow. She ran the only diner in Cedar Bluff, 6 booths, a counter with 5 stools, a kitchen that had not been updated since the mid-'80s. Her husband had died of a heart attack at the grill 10 years earlier, and she had run the place alone ever since, opening at 5 every morning and closing only when the last farmer had finished his coffee and pushed back from the counter. Verna hired Sage to wash dishes 3 nights a week. Minimum wage. Cash. No questions asked. "Adelaide used to sit in that booth right there," Verna said, pointing, with a chipped coffee mug. Every Sunday after church, same booth, same order, coffee, apple pie, whatever gossip she'd collected during the week. She smiled at the memory, the way people smile at the dead. She talked about your mother all the time, showed me pictures from when Marlene was a girl. Adelaide was so sure her granddaughter would come back someday. Verna looked at Sage across the counter. I guess she was right, just not the way she expected. Sage worked at that diner for 3 months, scrubbing pots until her hands cracked, mopping floors until her back ached, eating whatever Verna couldn't sell at the end of the night, which was sometimes the only food she got that day. It was not glamorous work. There is no romance in pot scrubbers and grease traps, but it was survival and it was honest. And at the end of each shift, Verna would slide a folded handful of bills across the counter and say nothing about how much. It was only nod once the way old soldiers nod. By the time April came around, Sage had a roof that didn't leak everywhere it used to. She had walls that mostly blocked the wind. She had a wood stove she had salvaged out of a collapsed shed 20 miles away, hauled home in the back of Adelaide's truck, and pieced together with wire and prayer and a stovepipe she could only describe as optimistic. She had learned to chop wood. She had learned to read the sky, to know when storms were coming by the way the clouds stacked themselves on the horizon. She had learned to bank a fire so it would last through the night. She had learned, in short, to live like her great-grandmother had lived, slow, careful, watching the land, and then she made an enemy. His name was Caleb Sterling. He owned the largest ranch in the county, 2,000 acres spread across both sides of the river. He raised cattle and grew wheat and employed half the town, which meant half the town owed him something, a paycheck, a favor, a deferred debt, a quiet word to look the other way when something needed not to be seen. He came up the road on a Thursday morning in the kind of pickup that still had factory polish on the chrome. He stepped out with boots that hadn't been near a real working field in years and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Whitmore," he said. The way he said her name made it sound like something he had scraped off the bottom of his shoe. "I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Thank you. I also wanted to make you an offer." He pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and held it out. $3,000 for the property as is. You could be gone by the end of the week. Sage looked at the paper. She did not take it. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, sweetheart. It's just a question of price." His smile widened, the way the smile of a man widens when he is used to getting what he wants and is mildly entertained by someone slow to understand it. "You're young," he said. "You don't understand how things work out here. This land is isolated, hard to access, expensive to maintain. You'll burn through whatever money you have by the first hard freeze. And then what? Then I'll figure it out. Like your great-grandmother did." The smile dropped off his face. "Adelaide was a stubborn old woman," he said. "Refused every offer I made her for 30 years. Sat out here alone, watching the place fall apart around her, watching her granddaughter never come home." He paused. "Is that what you want? To die alone in that house, with a window full of nothing?" Sage met his eyes. They were the pale gray of ice over standing water. "My great-grandmother kept this land in my family for 60 years, she said. I intend to do the same." Sterling's jaw tightened, just for a second. He covered it quickly, but Sage saw it. The flicker of a man who is not used to being told no by a girl with mud on her boots. "You have 90 days to pay the back taxes," he said. "If you miss the deadline, the county takes the land, and I will be there to buy it." "Then I'd better not miss the deadline." He stared at her a long moment, then he turned and walked back toward his truck. But at the door he paused. He looked back over his shoulder, and what he said next went into Sage's chest like a thin knife slipped between the ribs. "Your mother used to say the same thing," he said, "about not being moved, about standing her ground, stubborn, just like her grandmother. We all saw how that turned out." The world went quiet. For one suspended second, the wind stopped moving across the prairie. The crows in the cottonwood by the gate fell silent. The very dust on the road seemed to hold its breath. Caleb Sterling smiled, just the corner of his mouth. "Look how far your mother got, Miss Whitmore," he said. He climbed into his truck. He drove away. And Sage Whitmore stood alone in the road. Her great-grandmother had walked for 60 years, 80 acres of broken Montana. Behind her, the taste of iron suddenly on her tongue, and she understood for the first time, with the cold certainty of a hammer dropping on an anvil, that the man who had just driven down that road knew something about her mother, something Adelaide had never been allowed to know, something Marlene Whitmore had carried with her onto the bus that took her out of Cedar Bluff at 17 years old in the middle of the night, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret heavy enough to keep her running for the rest of her life. Sage stood there until the dust of his truck had settled, and then she turned and she walked back up the road toward the house and toward the barn and toward the journal her great-grandmother had left for her in a small room underground, because somewhere in those 30 years of pages in that careful cursive, Adelaide had written in by the light of a single lamp on long winter nights, the truth was waiting. The truth about Marlene, the truth about the night a 17-year-old girl had run, the truth about why Caleb Sterling had stood on this road today, smiling like a man who had been waiting most of his adult life for the chance to threaten another Whitmore woman. And Sage Whitmore, 18 years old, with $7 worth of land under her boots and a great-grandmother's love waiting in a leather book underground, decided in that moment that she was going to find out what he had done, even if it killed her, even if it cost her everything, because the bones of that house were good and the bones of her family were good, and she was the last Whitmore woman standing. She was not going to run. The first snow came on a Tuesday in late October. Sage was on the roof when she saw it. She had been nailing down a final sheet of salvaged tin, her fingers raw from the cold, her breath rising in pale clouds, and she happened to look up at the wrong moment, and there it was, a single flake, drifting past her face like something falling out of a dream, then another, then 100, then 1,000. Within minutes, the world had begun to change colors, and the brown grass that had bent under her boots all autumn had started to whiten, and the sky had pulled its gray hood down low over the prairie, like a man preparing for a long walk in bad weather. She climbed down off the roof slowly. She stood in the yard and watched the snow come. She was 18 years old. She had patched a roof that mostly didn't leak. She had hauled in 3 cords of wood and stacked it against the south wall of the house. She had cleaned out the wood stove and replaced its broken door with a piece of sheet metal hammered into shape with a rock. She had nailed plastic over the upstairs windows where the glass was gone. She had done in 7 months what most grown men with full crews and proper tools would have hesitated to do in 2 years. But she was not ready for a Montana winter. Not really. Nobody is ready the first time. The journal sat on the kitchen table that night, open to a page in the middle, while the snow piled against the windowsill in soft drifts and the wood stove ticked in the corner. Sage had been reading Adelaide's journal a few pages every evening since spring, the way a man might ration the last good bottle of whiskey in his cellar. There was 30 years of it. She didn't want to finish it too fast. She would sit at the kitchen table after work at the diner with a tin mug of coffee in one hand and the journal open in front of her, and she would read her great-grandmother's life, the births Adelaide had attended, the deaths, the seasons, the weather diaries she kept the way some women keep prayer books, the recipes scribbled in the margins, the notes about what cures what, yarrow for fever, garlic poultice for infection. Don't trust the new doctor in Billings, he's lazy. It was the closest thing to a grandmother Sage was ever going to have. She had begun to know Adelaide's voice the way you come to know a voice on the radio, the cadences, the dry humor, the way Adelaide would write 3 paragraphs about the weather and then a single sentence about her own broken heart and then go right back to the weather. Lost the brown hen to a fox last night. Marlene's birthday tomorrow. She would have been 28. Storm coming up from the south. That was Adelaide. That was how she carried things. It was a Saturday night in early November when Sage finally reached the part of the journal she had been afraid to reach. March of the year her mother ran. She knew the date before she saw it. She knew it the way a person knows when a fall is coming, the half second before their foot slips on ice. She had been pacing herself for weeks, reading slower as she got closer, finding excuses to put the book down and walk outside to fold laundry, to chop more wood she didn't need, because she had done the math, because she had known since the day Caleb Sterling stood on her road and smiled at her like a man holding a secret in his teeth that somewhere in this journal was the night her mother ran. She turned the page, and there it was, March 14th. The first half of the entry was missing. The page had been torn, not roughly, not in anger, but carefully, with the precision of a woman who had thought hard about what she was doing before she did it. A clean diagonal tear, half the page gone. Whatever Adelaide had first written on the night of March 14th was not in this book anymore. What remained in the bottom corner of the page in handwriting that was not quite steady was this: Caleb came to the house tonight. Marlene met him out by the front gate. I could not hear what they said, but I could hear how they said it. Voices low, the way two people speak when they are afraid of being overheard. Marlene came inside white as a sheet, would not look at me, went upstairs to her room. I knocked. She would not open the door. March 15th. Marlene is gone. I went up to her room this morning and she was not in her bed. Her suitcase is gone. Her coat is gone. On the kitchen table, she left one piece of paper. It said, Grandma, I have to go away. I am doing this to protect you. Please don't try to find me. I love you. I am so sorry, M. Sage sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she read those words. The wood stove ticked. The snow brushed against the window like a hand, asking to be let in. Out in the dark beyond the porch light, the wind was beginning to find its winter voice, low and patient, the voice of a thing that had been here long before her and would be here long after. She read the entry 3 more times. She thought about what Caleb Sterling had said to her on that summer road smiling. She thought about her mother at 17, walking out of this house in the middle of the night with a suitcase, leaving a note that said, I am doing this to protect you. Protect her from what? Protect her from whom? She turned the page slowly. There were 3 more entries that week, then 4 more the next week, then the rest of March, the rest of April, and all the way through that summer. Adelaide had written every few days about her search for Marlene, the phone calls, the letters, the bus stations she drove to, the detective she hired in Billings, and the way he took her money and gave her nothing back, the hospitals she called, the prayer she said every night before bed, bring her home, bring her home, bring her home. But there was something else in those entries that Sage had not expected to find. In April, Adelaide had written 1 line that did not seem to belong to any of the rest. I went to see Sheriff Ramsey today. He would not look me in the eye. I think he knows something. In May, another. Caleb Sterling came by today, said he wanted to offer his condolences for Marlene running off. Did not call her by name, smiled the whole time. I did not let him into the house. In June, 1 more. I think Caleb knows what happened to her. I do not have a way to prove it. I have written it down because if anything ever happens to me, someone should know that I always thought so. Sage closed the journal. She put her hands flat on the table. She steadied her breathing the way she had learned to do in bus stations at 3 in the morning when men with bad eyes came too close. She let her heart slow. She did not cry. She had not cried since the day she found the photograph on the wall in the back room. She did not have any crying left in her tonight. Instead, she sat there in the lamplight, in a kitchen that had been her mother's kitchen, in a house her great-grandmother had loved for 60 years, and she understood finally what she had bought for $7. She had not bought 80 acres of broken Montana. She had bought a fight. She had bought the unfinished business of two Whitmore women who had loved this place and been driven out of it in different ways. And now there was only her. Outside, the wind picked up. The snow began to come sideways. By morning, the prairie had been swallowed whole. The winter that followed was the hardest thing Sage Whitmore had ever lived through. She had thought she knew cold. She had slept in bus stations. She had spent a November curled against a laundromat vent. She had grown up in unheated dormitories where the radiator clanked but did not warm. She thought going in that she understood what cold was. She did not understand what cold was. A real Montana winter is not a temperature. It is a presence. It comes for you. It sits down on the prairie like an old animal and refuses to move. It does not knock. It does not negotiate. It works its way in through every gap in your walls and every crack in your boots and every hole in your knowledge of how to live. It finds the weak places in a house and a body and a soul, and it pushes. Sage learned that winter what her great-grandmother had been writing down for 30 years. She learned to keep the kettle on the wood stove at all times because if she let it go dry, the cast iron would crack. She learned to break the ice on the water barrel before sunrise because by sunrise, the ice was 3 inches thick. She learned to wear 2 pairs of socks inside her boots and to never let her feet get wet. She learned to read the snowdrifts the way sailors read waves. She learned on a Thursday in early December what it feels like to wake up at 4 in the morning with frost on the inside of your blankets and to understand in the first conscious second that if the fire is out, you will be in serious trouble within an hour. The fire was not out, just low. She fed it. She survived that night, but it was the first time it had occurred to her that she might not. Silas came when the weather allowed. He could not come every week. Sometimes the roads were impassable. Sometimes his mother needed him. But every 10 or 12 days, a truck would crunch up the snow-packed drive, and Silas would climb out with a thermos of coffee and a sack of split kindling his family had taken from their own woodshed, and he would spend the afternoon helping her shore up something, a door frame, a weak corner of the porch, the chimney pipe that kept threatening to come loose at the bend. He did not talk much. He never had. But Sage had learned by now that with certain men, silence is not absence. It is presence of a different kind. When Silas worked beside her, his shoulder a foot from hers, his breath rising into the cold, next to hers, he was saying things he did not say with words. I see you. I will not let this house fall down on you. My mother lived because of your great-grandmother. I am paying that back the only way I know how. One afternoon, while they were reseating the chimney pipe at the top of the wood stove, Silas spoke without looking at her. Sterling drove past the bottom of the road yesterday, he said. Twice. Slow. Sage paused. She held the pipe steady while he tightened the bracket. He's checking on me. He's watching you. What's the difference? Silas's hands did not stop moving. Difference is, a man who's checking just wants to know if you're still there, he said. A man who's watching is waiting for you to fail. He tightened the last bolt. He stepped back. He looked at her for the first time in the whole conversation. He'll come at you sideways, Silas said. Sterling does. He doesn't fight a thing head on. He waits till it can't fight back. He picked up his tool bag. My family lost 40 acres to him in a paperwork fight some years back, he said. He didn't take it with a gun. He took it with paperwork. By the time we knew what was happening, it was already done. He went to the door. He stopped his hand on the frame. You should know what he is, he said, and you should not be alone out here when he decides to move. He left. She watched his truck go down the long white road toward the gate. That night, the wind picked up to 40 miles an hour, and the lantern in the kitchen swayed on its hook, and the windows rattled in their frames, and Sage sat alone at the table and read Adelaide's journal for 2 more hours by the light of one lamp, and she understood that Silas Kettering was right. Sterling was going to come at her sideways. The only question was when. It started as those things always start, with a small thing. Verna Caldwell called her one afternoon at the end of November. Sage was on her way to the diner for the dinner shift. The road had been plowed by the county that morning, the second time all month, and Sage had been grateful, and now Verna's voice on the phone was thin in a way Sage had not heard before. "Honey, you don't need to come in tonight. Is it the storm? I can make it?" "It's not the storm." A pause, a long one. "The diner is closing, Sage." Sage stood in the kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear and the cold light coming gray through the window, and she did not say anything for a long moment because she could already hear the shape of the rest of it. "I'm sorry, honey," Verna said. "I really am. The building got sold 3 weeks ago. New owner just doubled my rent. I cannot make the numbers work. I am closing at the end of the week." "Who bought the building?" Another pause. "You know who bought the building." Sage closed her eyes. "I will work for nothing this last week," she said, "just to help you close it out." "You will not. I will pay you. I always paid you, and I will pay you." "Verna." "Sage, listen to me." Verna's voice changed. It got quiet in a way it did not usually get quiet. "I am 52 years old," she said. "I have run that diner for 10 years by myself. I will be all right. I am going to go stay with my sister in Billings for a while. I will find something else. I am not the one in trouble out here." A breath. "You are the one in trouble, and I am telling you, be careful. Caleb Sterling does not stop. He does not stop because he gets a thing. He stops because he breaks a thing. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes." "I do not think you do, but I love you for saying it." She hung up. Sage stood with the phone in her hand for another minute. Outside, the prairie was white in every direction and very still, the kind of still that happens just before a thing moves. She thought about her great-grandmother's journal. She thought about a 17-year-old girl walking out of this house in the middle of the night. She thought about Caleb Sterling buying a building she had never set foot in, just to take her job out from under her like a man pulling a chair out from under a child sitting down. He had not even raised his voice. He had not had to. The diner closed 3 days later. Verna left for Billings the day after that, with 2 suitcases in the back of her station wagon and a small wave from the driver's window. Sage watched her go from the front porch of the house. The wave was small because there was nothing big to say. The 2 women had spent 10 months together over dishes and coffee cups and old country songs on the kitchen radio, and now Verna was driving away because a man who would never set foot in the diner had decided to make her leave. That was how Sterling worked. Sage went back inside. She stoked the fire. She took out the journal. She read another 2 pages. Then she closed the book and laid her hand flat on its cover for a long time, and she said out loud to the empty kitchen, "I am not running." The accident happened on a Thursday in early December. The wind had been picking up all morning, the kind of wind that doesn't yet have snow in it, but is making promises. Silas had come out to help her shore up a section of the barn wall that had begun to bow in the cold, and they were working on the inside near the corner where the heavy crossbeam met the upright. The barn was an old structure. It had been built by hands that were dust now. They had done their best, those hands, but 70 years of Montana weather will find every cheat in a building, every shortcut, every joint that was not quite tight enough on a hot afternoon long ago. The crack came first. It was not loud. It was the sound of dry wood deciding after 70 years that today was the day. Sage looked up. Silas looked up faster than she did. He moved before she understood what was happening. He shoved her hard with both hands square in the chest, and she went sprawling backward into a pile of old straw, and the air came out of her in one solid grunt. And at the same moment, the crossbeam above where she had been standing came down. It came down sideways. It hit Silas across the right shoulder and drove him into the frozen ground. The barn did not collapse all the way. Most of it held, but that one beam, 10 feet of seasoned timber, heavy as a sleeping ox, had picked Silas Kettering and driven him into the dirt like a stake. Sage was on her feet before she remembered standing up. She was on her knees beside him before she remembered moving. He was awake. That was the first thing. His eyes were open. His face was the gray of old paper. His right arm was at an angle. A right arm is not meant to be at. He was breathing in short, careful pulls, the way a man breathes when he knows that a deeper breath is going to cost him. "Don't move," she said. "Silas, don't move. Don't move. I'm not moving. I'm going to get help. You're going to have to drive me. You can't sit up. I'm going to have to." The next 20 minutes were a long blur. Sage has never been able to fully reassemble in her memory. She remembers cutting his coat away from his shoulder with kitchen shears because she could not get it off him any other way. She remembers the dislocation, the angle of it, the way the joint sat too far forward under the skin. She remembers his voice talking her through it low and steady, his own voice telling her how to do what needed to be done while she did it. She got him into the truck. She drove the 28 miles to the county clinic with her hands locked on the wheel at 10 and 2 and her foot light on the gas because the road was patchy ice and she could not afford to lose the truck and Silas at the same time. He did not speak during the drive. He breathed. That was all. He breathed in those short, careful pulls and watched the road go by with his head leaned back against the window. At the clinic, 2 nurses and a young doctor, in his first year of practice, took Silas behind a curtain. Sage stood in the small waiting room with snow melting off her boots into a gray puddle on the linoleum. Opal Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later. Sage had called her from the clinic phone. There had been no one else to call. Opal walked through the door of the waiting room with her white hair frosted from the wind and her old wool coat unbuttoned at the throat. She did not yell. She did not cry. She did not embrace Sage. She came across the room and she stopped 3 feet away and she looked at the girl who had been her dead friend's great-granddaughter, and her pale blue eyes went over Sage's face the way a person checks an old photograph for damage. "Is he alive?" "Yes, he's alive. They're setting his shoulder. They think 2 ribs are broken." Opal nodded once, slow. "I told Adelaide 20 years ago that place was going to kill someone. She laughed at me. She said the place had never killed anyone yet. I told her then, there is a first time for everything." Sage said nothing. "He's my nephew," Opal said. "His father was my brother. I raised that boy for 2 years after my brother died when his mother was sick enough that we did not think she would live. She did live. She is alive today. But Silas became mine in those 2 years the way a child becomes a person's, when she sits up with him through a fever and feeds him from her own hand." Sage's throat closed up. "He is not just some boy from town. He is my own blood. He came back to this town to take care of his mother because that's who he is. He went out to your place because he is who he is, and he came back broken because that is what your place does." "Opal, don't." The older woman held up one hand. It was not a hand raised in anger. It was a hand raised in a kind of grief Sage had never been close to before, the grief of a woman who has already buried more people than she ever wanted to. "I do not blame you, Sage. You did not drop the beam, but I am asking you, woman to woman, stay away from him. Stay away from me. I have lost enough in my life. I cannot lose another one out of that house." She turned and she walked into the back room. She did not look back. Sage stood in the waiting room a long time. The fluorescent light hummed. A child cried somewhere down the hall. The young doctor came out at some point and said Silas would be all right. The shoulder was set. The ribs would heal. He would need 6 weeks. He would not be doing heavy work. He was going to be transferred to his mother's house in the next county where she could look after him while he healed. Sage drove home alone in the dark. The snow had started again on the way back, just light, just enough to dust the windshield and the long, empty road. When she got home, she did not light the lamp. She sat in the dark kitchen in her coat and her boots, and she put her head down on her arms on the table, and she stayed like that for a long time. She did not cry. She did not have any crying in her. She just stayed bowed there in the dark, in the cold, until the fire in the stove was almost out, and she had to get up and feed it, because that is what a person does. They feed the fire. They keep the kettle from going dry. They go on living because there is no other available option. The lawyer came on a Wednesday in mid-December. He was a thin man in a wool overcoat that fit too well and was too clean for the road. His leather shoes were entirely wrong for the slush on the porch. He had a kind of smile that does not actually involve any muscles of the face, only the showing of teeth. Miss Whitmore? Yes. My name is Bennett. I represent Mr. Caleb Sterling. He held out a folded paper. She did not take it. He let it hang in the air a moment, then he stepped forward and set it on the porch rail beside her. You're being served notice, he said. Mr. Sterling is asserting his legal right to the access road that crosses his property. Sage looked at the paper. She did not pick it up. What does that mean? It means the road you use to reach this farm crosses a parcel of land that Mr. Sterling purchased some years ago. He has chosen to exercise his property rights. Exercise them how? By closing the road, Miss Whitmore. The thin smile widened a quarter inch. You will still own your property, of course. You simply won't have a legal way to reach it, by vehicle or otherwise. He turned to go, then he turned back. Mr. Sterling has authorized me to renew his earlier offer, he said. $5,000, cash. You sign over the deed, you walk away. You can be in a new town before the new year. He's a generous man. Sage did not answer. The lawyer waited a moment. Then he nodded once as if her silence had only confirmed something he already knew, and he walked back to his car and he drove away. She stood on the porch a long time after he was gone. The folded paper sat on the railing. It did not occur to her to pick it up. It did not need to be opened. She knew what it said. She knew also what Adelaide had written about Sterling coming to the gate. She knew about the deed records she did not yet have the money to pull. She knew about Silas with a broken shoulder in his mother's house in the next county, and Verna in Billings with 2 suitcases, and Opal saying, "Stay away from us," and the journal on the kitchen table with the torn page in March. She knew that Sterling had not started this fight in November. He had not started it in March. He had started it years ago, in the same house she was now standing on the porch of, when he had said something to a 17-year-old girl that had been so frightening it had made her walk away from her grandmother forever. And now he was finishing it. He thought he was finishing it. The night of December 24th was when she nearly broke. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The temperature dropped to 30 below at sundown. The wind began to climb. By 8 at night the snow had started, and by 10 it was no longer falling, but flying blown sideways past the windows in long white ropes. The wood stove was burning hard, but the cold was coming in through cracks she had not known existed, through the door frames and the window frames and the old places in the walls where the chinking had given up. Her breath was visible inside her own kitchen. She had 3 logs left in the wood box. She had counted them twice. There were 3. The rest of the woodpile was outside against the south wall of the house under 3 feet of new snow, and the kind of wind a person did not walk into voluntarily. She sat in the rocking chair by the stove. She wore every piece of clothing she owned. Her great-grandmother's wool blanket was around her shoulders. Adelaide's journal was open on her lap, but she was not reading it. She was just looking at the handwriting, the shape of the letters her great-grandmother's hand had made. She thought with a kind of clear, tired honesty about leaving. She did not have to stay. She could walk out to the truck at first light if the truck would start, and she could drive away. She could leave the keys on the kitchen table. She could leave the journal. She could let the county take the land back. Sterling would buy it. Sterling would win, but Sage Whitmore would be alive. She would be on a bus somewhere south by next week. She would find another diner, another orchard, another laundromat vent. She had done it before. She could do it again. She sat with that thought a long time. She let herself look at it from every angle, the way Adelaide must have looked at every hard thought by the light of one lamp on a long winter night. And in the end, she did not leave. Not because she was brave. She was not brave that night. She was 18 years old and tired and afraid. She did not leave because of one sentence. A sentence her great-grandmother had written in a letter folded into the back of the journal, a letter Adelaide had addressed to no one in particular. The letter Sage had read twice already and would read 100 more times in her life. Keep the light in the window on, not for yourself, for whoever comes after you. That was the whole sentence. Sage looked at the kerosene lamp on the kitchen table. The flame inside the glass was small and steady. She had been thinking for the last hour about whether to put it out to save the fuel. She did not put it out. She turned it up. She set it on the windowsill in the front window where it could be seen from the road, and she pulled the rocking chair closer to the stove, and she pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, and she waited. She did not know what she was waiting for. She found out at 20 minutes past midnight. She saw it first through the gap in the curtain. Headlights, moving on the long county road at the bottom of the property, not driving steady, weaving, the kind of weaving a vehicle does when the driver is no longer fully in control. The lights came closer. They got slower. They reached the curve where the road dipped into a gully that filled with snow every winter and never quite drained. The lights stopped. They did not move again. For a moment, Sage thought she might be imagining things. No one drove in weather like this. No one drove out here at this hour on Christmas Eve. The road from town had to be impassable. The wind had to be making her see things in the dark. But the headlights stayed where they were, and then one of them flickered, and then the other. Someone was inside that car. Sage stood up so fast, the rocking chair banged against the wall behind her. She moved through the kitchen the way you move when your body has made the decision before your mind catches up. She pulled on her great-grandmother's heavy wool coat, the one Adelaide had worn for 20 winters of midwifery, the coat that had walked through a Montana blizzard to deliver Silas Kettering into the world. She wrapped the scarf around her face until only her eyes showed. She pulled the wool hat low. She grabbed the kerosene lantern from the table and lit a second wick. She grabbed the heavy wool blankets from the chest by the door. She went out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical assault. The wind tried to take her off her feet. The snow was coming sideways, ice-fine, blinding. Within 20 seconds, her eyelashes had frozen. Within 30, she could not feel her face. Within 40, she had to lean into the wind at a 30-degree angle just to keep moving in a straight line. But she could see the lantern in the window behind her. That was the trick. She could see the light her great-grandmother had told her to keep on. She walked down the long white slope of her property toward the road. 300 yards, maybe 400. The headlights of the stranded car got closer in slow, fierce increments. The lantern in her hand was nearly invisible in the storm, but the people inside the car would be able to see it the way the lighthouse keepers on the old coast had been able to be seen by ships, just a small, steady light moving through a sea of white. The car was a Honda Civic, a small front-wheel drive sedan, completely unsuited to a Montana winter. It had slid off the road and into the ditch on the downhill side, its rear wheels spinning uselessly against the ice, its front end buried up to the bumper in a snowdrift. Inside, through the snow-fogged glass, Sage could see shapes, a woman in the driver's seat, 2 children in the back huddled under what looked like a single thin blanket. Sage banged on the window with her gloved fist. The woman turned her head. Her face appeared in the glass, brown hair, wide eyes, terrified. Sage made the universal motion. Open the door! The woman fumbled. The door swung outward. The wind almost took it off its hinges. My children, the woman said. The voice came out broken. Please, my children. In the back seat, the older one, a boy of about 9, sat up straight when he saw Sage's face. He had his arm around the smaller one. A girl, maybe 5. The girl was not moving. Her lips were a color lips should never be. Sage did not think. She acted. She wrapped the little girl in 2 of her great-grandmother's wool blankets and lifted her against her chest. The child weighed nothing. She weighed like a bird. Sage did not remember running back up the long white slope of her property toward the lantern in the window. She remembered the weight in her arms. She remembered the boy stumbling along beside her, holding the corner of her coat. She remembered the mother behind them, dragging the blanket and a small bag, and not asking questions, just following the light. When they reached the porch, the mother slipped on the iced top step and went down hard on one knee, and Sage did not stop to help her up, because the little girl in her arms was not breathing right, and the boy beside her was crying for the first time, and Sage knew, with the strange clear certainty, Adelaide's journal had been training her toward for 8 months, exactly what she needed to do next. She kicked the front door open with her boot. She carried the little girl into the warm kitchen. She set her on the floor by the wood stove. She unwrapped the blankets. The boy stood in the doorway. The mother came in behind him, gasping snow falling off her in clumps onto the warped floorboards. She's not waking up, the mother said. She stopped talking an hour ago. Please, please. Sage looked at the small girl on the floor. Her lips were blue. Her skin was the color of old paper. Sage put her hand against the child's chest and felt just barely the slow, weak knock of a heart that had not yet decided. She looked up at the mother's name she would not learn for another hour. Hannah Whitfield, 2 children, Liam and Ella, driving from Idaho to a new job in North Dakota because she had nowhere else to go and no one else to ask for help. Sage did not know any of that yet. She only knew in that moment the thing Adelaide's journal had said about hypothermia in children in an entry written by lamplight long ago after Adelaide had spent 12 hours saving a 4-year-old boy named Ralph, who had wandered off into a December field and been found just before dawn. Do not warm them too fast. The cold blood in the arms and legs will rush to the heart and stop it. Slow heat, skin against skin, hot broth by spoon, drop by drop. Stay awake all night if you have to. Do not stop talking to them. They have to hear a voice. Sage looked at Hannah Whitfield. She looked at the little girl on the floor. She looked at the lantern still burning in the window, where she had set it on her great-grandmother's instruction. And in the warm yellow circle of that one small flame, she understood that the night was not over. The night was just beginning. Sage moved like a woman who had been preparing for this night her whole life without knowing it. She put another log in the wood stove. She did not put 2. 2 would have been too much heat too fast. She put 1. She opened the damper a quarter turn. She closed the kitchen door against the cold front room. She moved a wool blanket to the floor in front of the stove and laid the little girl on it. Hannah, she said. The mother flinched at the use of her name, though she did not yet know how Sage had heard it. She must have said it earlier in the storm. Hannah, listen to me. I need you to take off your coat. I need you to take off her coat too. You are going to lie down on this blanket with her. Skin against skin, belly to belly. You understand? She's freezing. That's why. What if I make her colder? You won't. You are the warmest thing in this house. Hannah, listen. I need you to do this. Hannah Whitfield's hands were shaking so hard she could not undo the buttons on her own coat. Sage knelt beside her and did them. She lifted Ella's small body out of her wet sweater. The child's skin was cold and waxy. The mother lay down on the blanket in her undershirt, her ribs visible under the fabric, and Sage laid the little girl against her mother's chest and pulled 2 more wool blankets over the both of them. The boy stood by the kitchen door watching. "What's your name?" "Liam." "Liam, are you cold?" He nodded. He did not cry. He had stopped crying somewhere on the walk up the slope. "All right, you come over here. You are going to sit by the stove, and you are going to drink something warm, and you are going to talk to your sister. Do you understand? She has to hear your voice, yours and your mother's, all night. You don't stop talking to her about anything, about what you had for breakfast, papas, about school, about the color of the kitchen wall, about what you want to be when you grow up, about anything in the whole world. You just keep talking. Can you do that?" He nodded again. He was 9 years old and he understood her perfectly. Sage put the kettle on the wood stove. She put on a small pot for broth. She brought her great-grandmother's journal from the table and she set it on the floor beside the blanket where Hannah lay with her daughter, and she opened it to the page she had read in October about a 4-year-old boy who had been found in a field and who had lived because Adelaide Whitmore did not stop working on him for 14 hours. She did not read it out loud. She just kept it open beside her. She did the things Adelaide had written. For the next 6 hours, Sage Whitmore did not sit down. She kept the fire at a steady low burn. She brought broth in small spoonfuls and pressed it between the child's lips until the swallow reflex returned, and then she gave a little more and a little more. She warmed wet cloths and put them against the pulse points at the child's throat and groin the way Adelaide had written, slowly, slowly, never letting the cloth get too hot. She made the mother eat. She made the mother drink. She made the boy tell her every detail about a Christmas pageant he had been in at school in 2nd grade and the brown reindeer antlers he had worn for it. She kept the lantern burning in the front window. The wind battered the house. The wood stove ticked. The hours passed. At 3:15 in the morning, the little girl's chest began to rise and fall in a way that was no longer the slow, shallow rise and fall of something dying. It became the long, deep, slow rise and fall of a child sleeping. Her lips were no longer blue. They were a pale, tired pink. At 3:40, she opened her eyes. She looked up at her mother's face above her. She said in a voice that was barely there, "Mama, I had a weird dream." Hannah Whitfield made a sound that Sage will remember on her deathbed. It was not a sob. It was the sound that comes out of a mother when something that had begun to leave the world comes back into it. Sage stood up from the floor. She walked into the front room. She put her forehead against the cold glass of the window where the lantern was still burning, and there in the dark, in the warm yellow circle of one small flame, she let herself cry for the first time since she had touched her mother's photograph on the wall in the back room in March. She cried not for what had been lost. She cried for what had been saved. Hannah Whitfield did not leave. The roads were closed for 3 days after the storm. By the time they reopened, Hannah's Honda was a total loss. The engine block cracked from the freeze, the front end crushed against the ditch wall. She had $200 in her purse and a job in North Dakota that would not wait. She sat at Sage's kitchen table on the 4th morning with both her children eating oatmeal beside her, and she looked across at this 18-year-old girl who had pulled her family back from the edge of the world. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't." "I have to." "You don't." Hannah looked down at her hands a long moment. Her hands were folded around a chipped white mug. She had been a bookkeeper for 12 years. She had worked for the same small accounting firm in Idaho until her husband had left her, and the firm had told her very politely that they were going in another direction. She had been 6 weeks behind on rent when she packed the car. She had been told there was a job in North Dakota for a woman with her experience, but the job would not wait past New Year's, and now the car was dead, and the road behind her was dead, and the road in front of her was dead, and she was sitting at a stranger's table in Montana with 2 children and $200. How much help do you need around here? Sage did not answer right away. She looked at this woman across her great-grandmother's table. She looked at the 2 children eating oatmeal. She thought about a man named Caleb Sterling and a folded legal notice still sitting on her porch rail under a 1/4 inch of snow and a deadline 90 days out that had now become 60. She thought about her great-grandmother's words, "Keep the light on, not for yourself, for whoever comes after you." "More help than I can pay for," Sage said. "I wasn't asking about pay." The 2 women looked at each other across the table. A whole agreement passed between them without another word being said. That was how the Whitfields came to stay. It was Hannah who pulled the deed records. She did it on the 5th morning after the storm on the public computer at the county clerk's office with Sage standing beside her. Hannah Whitfield, in her bookkeeper's habit, going through line items the way she had gone through line items for 12 years. Sage had explained the problem. The lawyer, the closed road, the strip of land Caleb Sterling claimed to have purchased years ago. The same year her mother had run. Hannah did not look up from the screen for an hour. Then she said very softly, "Sage." "What? Who is Thomas Whitmore?" Sage felt her stomach turn over. "He was my great-grandmother's brother-in-law. He married Adelaide's sister. They lived on the next property over. Adelaide mentioned him a few times in the journal. He died years ago. He died 3 months after he sold a strip of land to Caleb Sterling for $200, Hannah said. She turned the monitor so Sage could see. "That's the deed transfer. There's the date. There's the signature." She pointed. "That's your great-uncle Thomas's signature." Sage looked. It was a child's signature, a tremor in every line, the kind of signature a man makes when his hand will not do what his mind tells it to do anymore. "Sage," Hannah said, "I'm not a lawyer, but I've done estate work. When you do estate work, you learn what the signatures of people with dementia look like." She did not say anything else. She did not have to. That night, Sage sat at the kitchen table for a long time with Adelaide's journal open in front of her, going slowly through the entries from the 2 years before her mother ran. She found what she was looking for in an entry from a November long ago. "Drove out to see Thomas this afternoon. He did not know me. He thought I was his mother. He cried when I left. The doctor in Billings says it is the dementia and that it will get worse, not better. Helen has her hands full. I will go out and help her with him every week from now on." In June of the year, Marlene ran an entry of 3 lines. "Thomas died yesterday in his sleep. Helen called this morning. The funeral is Tuesday. He has been gone in spirit for a long time. Now he is gone in flesh." Sage closed the journal. She sat very still in the kitchen. She understood finally the full shape of what Caleb Sterling had done. He had bought a piece of land from a man who could no longer legally sell it. He had gotten the signature of a man who no longer knew his own name. He had done it in the same spring he had stood at her great-grandmother's front gate and had a conversation with a 17-year-old girl that had made her walk away from her life forever. The next morning, Sage drove into town with Hannah beside her and Liam and Ella in the back of the truck, wrapped in coats too big for them, and she asked Opal Hendricks one question. "Is there a lawyer in this town who hates Caleb Sterling?" Opal looked at her over the cash register for a long moment. She had not spoken to Sage since the night in the clinic. She looked at Hannah. She looked at the 2 children. She looked back at Sage. "There is one," Opal said. "His name is Walter Ashford. He is 74 years old, and he lives in a cabin by the river. He retired from a law practice in Billings 20 years ago because his wife died and he could not stand the city anymore. He does not take cases. He does not see people. He fishes. He reads books." She paused. "He has hated Caleb Sterling for 30 years. "Why?" "That is for him to tell you." Opal wrote an address on a scrap of paper. She slid it across the counter. She did not smile. She did not soften. But when Sage reached out and took the paper, the older woman put her hand briefly on top of Sage's hand, and she held it there for 1 second longer than a stranger would have, and that was all. It was enough. Walter Ashford answered his cabin door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on top of his head. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and the kind of long, careful face that did not betray much. He looked at Sage on his porch. He looked past her at the truck where Hannah waited with the children. "You're the Whitmore girl." "Yes, sir. I knew your great-grandmother. Most people did." He nodded slowly, and a thin smile moved across his face for the first time. Just a flicker. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "I have been waiting a long time for someone to walk up that porch with the right last name." Walter Ashford took her case for free. He told her, sitting in front of his Riverstone fireplace with a cup of coffee in his hand, the part of the story Opal had not told her. Some years before Marlene ran, Caleb Sterling had done the same thing to another family, the Bracewells. They had owned a ranch east of town for 5 generations. The old man, Aaron Bracewell, had a stroke that left him weak in the head, and one afternoon Sterling came around with a set of papers, and within 6 months, the Bracewell ranch was gone. The son who lived in Denver tried to fight it. Walter Ashford had been his lawyer. They had lost. Aaron Bracewell died of a second stroke a month later. The son moved to California and never came back to Montana. Sterling had a cousin in the sheriff's office back then, Walter said. "Same cousin who buried whatever your mother tried to file. I always thought there was more. I never had the evidence to chase it. I never had a Whitmore willing to chase it with me." He looked at Sage over the rim of his cup. "You willing?" "Yes, sir." "You understand what this will cost. Not money. I am not charging you. I mean what it will cost in time and in fight. Sterling will come at you. He will come at the people around you. He has lawyers in Billings I cannot match in numbers. He will not give up an inch. He has already done all of those things, Mr. Ashford." Walter Ashford nodded once, very slowly. He set his coffee down. "All right then." The next 6 weeks were a kind of war Sage had not known she was capable of fighting. Walter went to work in his cabin, and at the county records office, and at the state archives in Helena. He requested deed transfers. He requested the medical files of Thomas Whitmore from the 2 years before his death, which had been kept by a small practice in Billings that had since closed, but whose records had gone into a county warehouse. He had a friend at the state bar who knew a friend at the Department of Health, and the medical records came. The medical records were a wall. Diagnosis: severe dementia with progressive cognitive decline. 2 years before the sale. Patient is not legally competent to enter into binding agreements. Signed by Dr. Lawrence Hendry, Billings, Montana. The deed transfer was dated in the summer of the year Marlene ran, 20 months after the diagnosis. Hannah Whitfield wrote up the bookkeeping summary that connected the dollar amounts. $200 paid for a strip of land that at its current assessed value was worth $38,000. The transaction had been recorded without witnesses. The notary stamp had belonged to a woman who had worked at Sterling's ranch as a part-time secretary. But it was the police report that Walter found last, and it was the police report that broke the case open. He found it in a county evidence locker in a folder that had been miscatalogued under the wrong year for 2.5 decades. A complaint filed March 12th of the year Marlene ran by a 17-year-old girl. The girl's name was Marlene Whitmore. The complaint alleged that one Caleb Sterling had forged the signature of one Thomas Whitmore on a draft deed of sale that had not yet been recorded with the county. The complaint included a description of the document. It included 2 pages of handwritten notes by Marlene listing the discrepancies. It even included a photocopy, smudged but readable, of a real Thomas Whitmore signature from a piece of mail Marlene had taken from her great-uncle's house months earlier. The two signatures did not match. The complaint had been received by the sheriff's office. It had been stamped with a date. It had been assigned a case number. And then 23 hours later, it had been marked closed, no action, and filed away in the wrong folder, in the wrong year, in a locker no one had opened since. The sheriff who had signed off on the closure had been Caleb Sterling's first cousin. The sale was finalized 5 months later in the late summer, after Marlene was already gone. The document Sterling actually recorded with the county was a cleaner version than the draft Marlene had seen, but it bore the same forged signature on a man who had been bedridden by then. Walter Ashford sat in his cabin the night he found the police report. He poured himself 1 finger of bourbon, the only finger of bourbon he allowed himself in a year. He looked at the document on the table in front of him for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and he called Sage Whitmore. "I have it," he said. "You have what?" "Your mother." The hearing was set for the end of February. The courtroom in the county seat was small and old, with a high ceiling and a slow-moving radiator, and 1 tall window through which the gray winter light fell at an angle. Caleb Sterling sat at one table with 3 lawyers in fitted suits. Sage sat at the other with Walter Ashford in his rumpled blazer and Hannah Whitfield beside her, hands folded in her lap. The judge was a woman named Patricia Reeves. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that had spent 30 years on the bench and was not going to be moved by a man's expensive lawyer or a girl's quiet face. She listened to both opening arguments without interrupting. She had read the briefs. Walter Ashford rose to present his case. He did it the way an old craftsman builds a piece of furniture. Slowly, joint by joint, he laid out the deed transfer. He laid out the medical records of Thomas Whitmore from the 2 years before the sale. He laid out the assessed value of the strip versus the price paid. He laid out the notary records and the relationship of the notary to Caleb Sterling. He laid out Hannah Whitfield's bookkeeping summary, connecting the financial discrepancies. Sterling's lawyers objected. They cited statutes of limitations. They argued that the patient had had lucid intervals. They argued that any irregularities were administrative in nature and not fraud. Judge Reeves listened. She took notes. She did not interrupt them either. Then Walter Ashford did something that Sterling's lawyers did not expect. He said, "Your Honor, the petitioner has 1 additional piece of evidence to introduce." He held up a folder. 3 days before she vanished from this town, a 17-year-old girl walked into the Cedar County Sheriff's Office and filed a complaint alleging that Caleb Sterling had forged her great-uncle's signature on property documents. A silence began to gather in the courtroom. The complaint was closed 23 hours after it was filed. It was marked "No Action." It was filed in a folder under the wrong calendar year. It was not seen again by any human being for 2.5 decades. He stepped forward. He laid the folder on the table in front of the judge. The young woman who filed the complaint was Marlene Whitmore, the granddaughter of Adelaide Whitmore, the mother of my client. 3 days after her complaint was closed, Marlene Whitmore boarded a Greyhound bus in Billings at 1:50 in the morning, carrying 1 suitcase with no destination listed on her ticket. She never returned to Cedar Bluff. The silence in the courtroom became a held breath. The sheriff who signed off on the closure of that complaint was Caleb Sterling's first cousin. Sage was looking down at the table in front of her. She could not look up. Hannah Whitfield put a hand quietly on Sage's forearm and kept it there. Walter Ashford continued, "My client has lived 18 years not knowing why her mother left Cedar Bluff. She has lived 18 years believing what her mother was forced to allow her to believe, that her mother left of her own choice, that her mother abandoned her family." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Marlene Whitmore did not abandon anyone. Marlene Whitmore tried to do the right thing. She tried to file a complaint about a crime. She was shut down by a public official who was related by blood to the man she was reporting, and then 3 days later she vanished from this town in the middle of the night. He turned, just slightly, so that he was no longer facing the judge. He was facing Caleb Sterling. I do not know what Mr. Sterling said to that 17-year-old girl at her grandmother's front gate. I have my theories. We will not be able to prove them today. We will leave that for the district attorney. He turned back to the bench. But today, Your Honor, we ask the court to find that the deed transfer at issue was procured by fraud, that it is void, that the access road in question has always belonged to the Whitmore estate as it had since 1923, that my client owes no easement fee to Mr. Sterling because Mr. Sterling has never lawfully owned the land in question. We further ask the court to refer all evidence presented today to the district attorney for criminal investigation. He sat down. Judge Patricia Reeves looked at Caleb Sterling for a long, slow moment. She looked at his lawyers. She did not look at Sage. Motion granted, she said, on both counts. The gavel came down. It was the same sound that had bought Sage 80 acres for $7 almost a year ago. It was a different sound today. Sage walked out of that courthouse with Hannah Whitfield on one side of her and Walter Ashford on the other, and the cold February air hit her face like a hand opening, and she did not cry there on the steps. She would not cry until later. She walked down the courthouse steps the way her great-grandmother had taught her, through 30 years of words written in a journal by lamplight, the way a woman walks when she has just won a thing that did not belong to her alone. She had won it for the woman who had stood in front of a white farmhouse smiling at a camera, hand raised to shade her eyes from the sun. The truth about Marlene came out in pieces in the weeks that followed, the way the truth usually does. Walter Ashford pieced together the rest of it from interviews with 3 people who had been afraid to speak at the time and were no longer afraid at 73, 76, and 81. They had been afraid, those people, of Caleb Sterling's family, of his cousin in the sheriff's office, of what could happen in a small Montana town to a person who said the wrong thing about the wrong man. The story they told together, the 3 of them, was this. Marlene Whitmore had been 17 years old working that spring at the small accountant's office on Main Street where she filed papers and answered the phone. She had come across a draft deed transfer between Thomas Whitmore and Caleb Sterling almost by accident, sorting through Sterling's tax filings. The document had not yet been recorded with the county, but the signature was already on it. Something about the way the letters tilted had stopped her. She had grown up visiting her great-uncle on Sundays. She had seen him not know her name for 2 years. She had known he could not have signed that document on the date listed. She had gone to the sheriff's office. She had filed the complaint. The next night, Caleb Sterling had come to the front gate of the Whitmore property after dark, and Marlene had met him there, and what he had said to her, Walter Ashford pieced together from 3 different sources, had been very simple and very specific. He had told her that if she did not withdraw the complaint, something was going to happen to her grandmother. He had told her, smiling, that Adelaide was an old woman alone in a big house, and that old women alone in big houses had accidents all the time. Falls, fires, slips on icy porches in the winter, things that happen, things that no one would investigate too hard because old women fell and old houses burned, and that was the nature of a small town like this. He had told her to think very hard about whether she wanted to be the reason her grandmother died. Marlene Whitmore had stood at the front gate of her great-grandmother's house at 17 years old with a Montana spring night around her, and she had made the only choice a girl could make under those words. She could not unfile the complaint. That was already on the record, but she could remove herself. She could remove the witness. She could disappear so completely that there would be no one for Sterling to threaten through. No daughter, no granddaughter, just a stubborn old woman alone in a house who knew nothing, who could be left alone. She had packed a suitcase that night. She had left a note on the kitchen table. She had walked 5 miles in the dark to the highway, and she had caught a ride to Billings, and she had gotten on a bus, and she had ridden out of Montana, and she had never come home. She had been pregnant by then, though she had not known it yet. The young man she had been seeing, a quiet boy from a farm outside Cedar Bluff, did not even know she had left until she had been gone 3 weeks. He looked for her for 2 years. He did not find her. He died in a tractor accident on his family's farm a few years later at the age of 20. He had not known he was Sage's father. Marlene Whitmore had raised her daughter alone in a small apartment in Nebraska, working 2 jobs, never going back to Montana, never writing to her grandmother because she believed with a 17-year-old's terror that had never quite let her go, that any letter she sent might bring Caleb Sterling to Adelaide's door. She had died in a car accident on a winter highway when Sage was 4 years old. She had never gotten to tell anyone what had happened to her, until now. Sage walked out to the oak tree at the back of the property the evening she heard the full story. It was the tree Adelaide had planted in 1955, the year she married. It was 100 feet tall now. It had bark like dark armor and a crown that moved in the wind the way old slow animals move. Sage stood under it for a long time with her hands in the pockets of her great-grandmother's coat, and she watched the late February sky turn from gray to a soft pale pink. "Mama," she said it out loud, to the tree, to the sky, to the long, wide Montana evening. "Mama, you didn't leave me. You didn't leave any of us." The wind moved through the oak. The light moved across the prairie. She stood there until the first stars came out, and then she walked back up to the house, and she opened the front door, and the lamp in the front window was burning, and inside Hannah was reading a book by the stove, and Liam and Ella were drawing pictures on scrap paper at the kitchen table, and Sage Whitmore understood in that moment that she was not the last Whitmore woman in this house. She was the first Whitmore woman in this house in a quarter of a century to come home. The investigation took 8 months. It found in the end more than Caleb Sterling had ever expected. It found the Bracewell Ranch. It found 2 other properties acquired through similar paperwork. It found a pattern of fraud reaching back into the mid-1980s. Sterling did not go to prison. He had good lawyers. He had money. But he lost the things money cannot quite buy back: his reputation, his banks, his business partners. By the end of that year, he had been forced to sell most of his ranch to pay the legal fees and the civil settlements. He left Cedar Bluff on a November morning, driving down the same county road he had once tried to close. Sage was on the front porch drinking coffee when his truck went past at the bottom of the property. She did not wave. She did not need to. There was no longer anything to say. Silas came back to the farm in the spring. His shoulder had healed. His ribs had healed. He brought with him, when he came up the long drive in the back of his mother's pickup, a small wooden sign carved by his own hand, the letters burned in with a careful precision Sage had seen him use only on the things he loved. Whitmore Farm, Essendino, 1923. "For the gate," he said, "when you're ready." He said it on the porch rail. He did not stay long that first visit. He came back the next week, and the next. He helped with the planting that spring. He helped Liam build a coop for the new chickens. He fixed the engine on Adelaide's old truck. He did not say much. He had never said much, but Sage noticed that spring that she had begun to be less surprised by him being there than she was by him not being there. He kissed her once that summer by the gate at dusk, the way men in Montana sometimes kiss women, like it was a thing they had been thinking about for a long time and had decided was no longer something they could put off. After neither of them said anything, they walked back up the road together, slow in the long blue summer evening. That was how it began. That was all. Opal Hendricks came back too on a Sunday in April with a casserole dish in her hands, and her white hair newly cropped and her old wool coat unbuttoned in the warming weather. She stood on the porch and she said, "I was wrong about you, Sage Whitmore." "You weren't wrong, Opal. You were scared. There's a difference." "I am too old to be scared. I am going to start over." She came inside. She sat at the kitchen table where Adelaide had sat for 60 years. She stayed for dinner. She came back the next Sunday and the Sunday after that, and within 3 months it had become understood, without anyone saying it out loud, that Opal Hendricks ate Sunday dinner at the Whitmore farm now, the way Adelaide had eaten Sunday dinner in town, the two old women trading places across the long arc of half a century. Verna Caldwell visited in July on a swing through from Billings. She did not move back. Her life had moved on, but she stayed 3 days. She sat in the kitchen and drank coffee with Sage and Hannah and laughed for the first time in years. Before she left, she handed Sage a small frame photograph. It was Adelaide sitting in a booth at the old diner holding a cup of coffee, smiling at the camera. "I had it on the wall behind the register for 15 years, Verna said. "I want her to be in this house, where she belongs." Sage hung it in the front room, next to her mother's photograph. 3 Whitmore women, 3 generations, all home again. The lighthouse did not have a name until the second winter. It started with one woman. Her name was Eleanor. She was 68 years old. She had lost her husband to a long illness the previous spring, and she had discovered, after the funeral, that the small house they had been living in for 40 years was not actually paid off, and that she could not afford the back payments, and that she had nowhere to go. She had no children. Her sister had died. She had been quietly making plans she did not tell anyone about when Opal mentioned to her in the feed store one afternoon that there was a young woman out at the old Whitmore place who might have a spare room for a few weeks. Eleanor came out on a Tuesday in November. She stayed 6 weeks. She helped in the kitchen. She knit Ella a sweater. She told Sage stories about Adelaide that nobody else was still alive to tell. By the end of those 6 weeks, she had found a small apartment in town she could afford and a part-time job at the library, and a reason to keep going that she had not had when she walked up the porch steps. The boy came after Eleanor. He was 17 and he had aged out of the foster system in Nebraska 2 months earlier, and he had hitched as far as Billings before he ran out of money. A trucker had heard about a farm in Cedar Bluff that took people in. The boy showed up in February with a backpack and a black eye and a way of holding himself that Sage recognized from 1,000 bus station benches. She made him a bed in the back room. She gave him her great-grandmother's journal to read. He stayed 6 months. When he left in the late summer, headed for a community college in Bozeman, where Sage and Hannah had helped him apply, he stood at the front gate a long time before he climbed into the truck Silas had agreed to drive him in. "What do I owe you?" he said to Sage. "Nothing." "That's not an answer." "All right, keep a light on, for whoever comes after you." He looked at her. He nodded. He climbed into the truck. The veteran came into fall. He had been to Afghanistan, and he could not sleep inside a house anymore. He pitched a small tent in the corner of the barn and stayed for the winter eating with the family, but sleeping under canvas. And by the spring, he had begun to sleep sometimes on the porch. By the summer, he could sleep in the back room with the window open. He left for a veterans program in Missoula in October. The young mother came in November with a small girl and a black eye she would not talk about. Sage gave her Hannah's old room since Hannah had moved into Adelaide's room by then. The young mother stayed 4 months. When she left, she had a job and an apartment and a restraining order. The townspeople began to call the farm the lighthouse sometime in that second winter. Sage did not name it. Other people named it. They named it because of the lamp Sage left burning in the front window every night from sundown to dawn, the way Adelaide had told her to in the letter folded into the back of the journal. They named it because travelers on the dark county road had begun to use it as a landmark. "You'll see the light. Just follow the light. That's how you know you're there." Sage did not put up a sign saying so. She left Silas's carved wooden sign on the gate. Whitmore Farm, Eston, 1923. That was enough. The other name belonged to the town. The town could keep it. The end of this story, if a story like this has an end, came on a Sunday evening in October of Sage Whitmore's third year on the farm. She was 21 years old. She walked out to the oak tree at the back of the property as the sun was going down. She wore her great-grandmother's coat, the same coat that had walked through 3 blizzards in 3 different decades to save 3 different families. The trees were turning. The leaves were dropping gold and red onto the long grass. The sky was the pale, clear blue that Montana skies turn when the year is getting ready to lay itself down. Behind her, the house was lit up. Hannah was in the kitchen with Opal putting the last of the Sunday dinner on the table. Liam, 12 now, was helping Silas put away tools in the barn. Ella, 8, was running across the yard with a half-grown black puppy named Pilot, both of them laughing at nothing, the way only children and dogs can laugh at nothing. Eleanor had driven out from town with 2 pies. Verna had sent a postcard from Billings. The veteran from the fall before the one from Afghanistan was writing letters, now sometimes from the program in Missoula. He was doing better. Sage stood under the oak and she took out a folded letter from the inside pocket of her great-grandmother's coat. She had carried it on her, that letter, for almost 3 years. It had been written by Adelaide and left in the journal in an envelope marked simply, "For whoever finds this place." She unfolded it now. She read it again even though she had it by heart. "My dear one, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I do not know who you are. Maybe you are Marlene, finally come back to me after all these years. Maybe you are someone I never had the chance to meet. It does not matter. You are here now. You found this place, and that makes you family. This land has been in our family for almost 100 years. It has seen hard times and good. It has buried our dead and raised our children and held us up when we had nowhere else to lean. It will hold you too. All I ask is this: keep the lamp in the window burning, not for yourself, for whoever comes after you, for whoever needs a place to rest, for whoever needs a moment of warmth in a hard night, for whoever needs the reminder that they are not alone in this world. We are never alone, not really. The people who love us leave pieces of themselves behind, in the land, in the walls, in the lamp burning in the window. They are still here, and now so are you. Welcome home, your grandmother Adelaide." Sage folded the letter. She put it back inside her coat. She looked up at the wide Montana sky, going slowly from blue to rose to lavender, and she thought about a girl of 17 standing at a front gate in the spring of a year long ago, making a choice no girl should have had to make. She thought about that same girl raising a daughter, alone in a Nebraska apartment, never riding home, dying on a winter highway with the address of the farm she could not return to folded somewhere in her wallet. She thought about a great-grandmother writing 13 birthday cards to a child she had never met by the light of one lamp in a kitchen, now warm again with people. She thought about the 18-year-old girl she had been 3 marches ago, standing in a courthouse with $7 worth of land under her boots and no one in the world. She thought about how none of them had been alone. Not really, not in the end. "Mama," she said quietly to the sky. "Grandma, I'm home." She turned and she walked back up the long grass path toward the house. The kitchen window was full of yellow light. The front window held the lamp she had set there before sundown, the way she set it every night, the way Adelaide had told her to. Silas was coming out of the barn with Liam at his side. Ella came running across the yard with the puppy at her heels calling Sage's name. Hannah was on the porch holding open the door. The light from inside the house fell out onto the grass. Sage walked into it. She closed the door behind her. The lamp in the front window kept burning. the way it would burn every night for as long as Sage Whitmore lived in that house. For Marlene, who had not been able to come home. For Adelaide, who had waited 30 years. For a boy from Nebraska who would one day pass it on the highway and turn his head. For a young mother in a borrowed coat with a child in her arms. For a veteran who could not yet sleep inside walls. For an old woman who had lost her husband and did not know where to go. For whoever came after. For whoever needed it. For as long as there were people in this world who walked the dark roads alone, looking for a light in a window, the light in this window would be on. That was the promise. That was the inheritance. That was the truth Sage Whitmore had bought on a Tuesday in March in a courthouse that smelled like dust and old varnish for $7.